software is a very creative thing.
Welcome to the LabVIEW experiment. I am your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. In my 15 years of working with and training developers, I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of experiments. Over here, we believe in embracing failure as the essential learning experience that it is. And what better way to learn than from other people's mistakes? In this podcast, I talk to industry experts, colleagues, and friends about their failures and how they have turned them into future successes. Okay, so I am here today with Fabiola De la Cueva, or Fab, as many of you may know her. Kind of got that like Madonna thing going, where you just say Fab and it's just one name and everybody knows who you're talking about for the most part. Although, as we were discussing earlier, not everybody, so.
Yeah, not everybody knows who I am. At GDevCon in Europe, it was, we asked how many people was the first conference. And it was actually nice to see that half of the people in the room were new. And I saw a lot of people that were in their mid-20s. So that's a good news for the LabVIEW world, because there were a lot of young blood. It was scary for me for my presentation, because I was figuring I was going to be presenting in a group of old timers, right? Like all my friends. And then all of a sudden half of the room were new. And then Kabul asked them, like, who doesn't know Fab? And of course, nobody was going to raise their hands. But I knew from talking to people before the conference started that there were several people that had no idea who I was, which is fine. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
But don't assume that everyone knows who I am.
I was shocked at that 60% number too, and it made me start thinking about GDevCon in general and just like what we should be doing as far as like targeting our presentations and stuff. Because we've always, at least for GDevCon and A, we always tried to aim right for dead for the middle. Because I figure if you
Well,
go too far to either extreme, you leave a lot of people out. If you stay in the middle, the people on the extremes can kind of get a little something out of it, and it kind of works.
so that was one thing, we need to kind of like tell an eye. The CLA summits are still needed, I believe, because you still need to have a forum for it's like really advanced and like corner case stuff. And it doesn't have to be every year. It could be like even a biennale or a triennale or something like that, right? Because we do have enough events between the GDevCons that it may not be needed, but I think that's needed. And then we did a DQMH day after GDevCon in A,
Mm-hmm.
and I was surprised also about the extent, like, because remember we opened it to anyone. You didn't have to have had attended GDevCon in A, so there were a couple of people that just went to the DQMH day. And it was a little surprising to me that they were more at the beginner side of things. Like they had just started using LabVIEW last couple of years and they were trying to look for a framework. So it does seem like we do need something for the extremes, but I like how GDevCon, both NA and GDevCon are, where there's a little bit for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do feel like we need still something where, like, I remember some of the CLA summits, like some examples. One was when Norm jumped into the table and
Was that
we
Norm or Steen or both of them? Or were they
no,
both?
that was Norm. Norm jumped on the table. Steen was very adamant about it, but he did not jump on any
Okay.
table. But it was a whole discussion about events.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of things came out of that discussion. We got half of the room thought that it was a bug, half of the room thought it was a feature, that the event structure would restart the timer if you had registered for an event, regardless if you were handling it or not. I
Oh,
can tell you
that's
now
kind
that
of
it was
cool.
a bug because
Oh,
they
it was a
changed
bug
it.
because they changed it. I was gonna say it doesn't do that anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't do that anymore. So they changed it. So that change came about from that discussion with CLAs. I think it was 2013, 2012, maybe. I'm dating myself here. But I mean, that's the type of stuff that you can get with people that have been using LabVIEW for a while, that have a certification as architects, that have really pushed LabVIEW to the limits, right? That you wouldn't get at a GDevCon necessarily.
Yeah. No. I'm curious what you thought of the huddles because I think like the huddles could potentially provide some of that type of space if somebody.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was the first time that GDevCon was doing that. I was one of the first huddles. I didn't like how ours went because even though we wanted to make it interactive, the fact that we got the largest rooms and we were still on the stage, kind of made it hard to get people to interact with us. So from what we learned from that huddle, when Matthias had his also in the big room, he didn't got on stage. He stayed off stage. And I was helping him moderate, so I was asking more direct questions and making sure like once he had done his demo, I was like, Matthias, why don't we start the conversation now, right? Because otherwise he was gonna keep talking and make it a lecture. And the whole idea of the Huddles is like, let's work together to solve a problem. Or not a problem, but like let's discuss more. It's supposed to be, I think the person that organizes the huddle is supposed to be more of a moderator and not really, take charge of it.
That's interesting. In mine, we had too much interaction because I did a mob programming session. I was expecting like 10 people. And we had 40 some people show up. So
you did mob programming before? That would be interesting.
yeah, well, we had 10 people actually programming or something like that. And then we had like 30 people watching. And I made a mistake because so normally when I do this, like I tell people, like, if you're not the typer or the driver, like don't talk, just like observe. And then partway through, I'm like, okay, if you have an idea, you can just throw out a suggestion. Well, I did it too early because immediately 40 hands went up and they all started shouting over each other with their suggestions. And I'm like, oh, I was like, this doesn't work so well. But we figured.
I guess it's a lesson too for everyone of how it can work and how it cannot.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
the interesting thing is if you do enough of that type of mob program, you realize that whatever idea you have, eventually they'll get around to it or they'll come up with a better solution sometimes. Or sometimes I realize that, well, my idea really wasn't that good and what they did was better anyway. So it's a good thing that I didn't say anything. So sometimes there's value in like not blurting out your ideas immediately and just seeing what happens.
Yeah, that is true. I do have a problem with that. Although it's good to to start programming because that slows you down sometimes, and that gives time for the people that are observing to be jumping a lot faster than what you can program, and then that gets them discussing more.
Yeah,
so in a sense, it's good to give me the mouse so I shut up.
What was interesting, so in the DQMH workshop, right, we do the exercise where they like build their own little template project. And it was I was trying to walk a fine line because I wanted to give them direction and I kind of knew what I wanted them to do, but I didn't want to like spoon feed them every step because I wanted them to think for themselves. It worked out okay, but there were parts where I felt like I was giving a little bit too much direction. So
I mean, you also have to, like, in the case of a workshop where people are learning or any other thing, you do have to give a little bit more just because people don't know.
They don't know what the options are.
So they're trying to solve two problems. They're solving the problem at hand of the application that they're trying to build, but they're also solving the problem of, I don't really know how this framework is supposed to work.
Yep.
And that, I mean, it's okay. Like it's as a person that is facilitating the exercise, our job is to kind of like tell them, don't worry so much about the DQMH side. Let's try to solve the problem. And then once it gets to doing the little table with what should be a request, what should be a broadcast, I'll help you, right? But you have to provide direction. The last time I taught a DQMH workshop, it was like how we talk about the tense, like use present tense or like basically a command for the request, and then use past tense or passive voice for the broadcast. And I think if you have doing it for a while, you understand it. But when it's the first time that you're doing it, like that naming, people don't understand why we're so picky about it. And then once they start coding, they're like, oh, now I get it, why you were pushing me to get the right naming.
Yeah. Right. Well, I was really happy because I had them do like the tree structure and bubble stuff up and down. And at first they were like, oh, this is a lot of work. And then by the end, they're like, okay, now I see why you wanted me to do that. That makes sense now. I was like, okay.
Although I have to tell you that approach of teaching the tree sometimes makes me very nervous because people start thinking too much about the tree, and I feel like getting the language and just being able to explain what you're doing in plain English will get you to a tree naturally for what makes sense, right? Like one of the things that we can do with DQMH, and I understand that a lot of people can end up hanging themselves, is that there are certain things, like for example, having a module that registers to all the modules in your project that
their
have
status
errors.
on it or something. Yeah.
Like that totally makes sense. There's no need for a tree if you're doing something
Oh
generic
yeah,
like
no,
that.
we definitely did do that. We had like a logger that you could just send a string to from anywhere,
Yeah,
and
or the
everything depended on that. It nothing registered for it, but everything could send to it.
yeah. So but if you're doing that, like there's an interesting discussion there. Do you put the error, the logger as a dependency of everything, where everybody has to send a request to it to log,
Or do you bubble it
or
up and log it at the
or you put it on the side, and that module is registering. You know that all the modules have an error
Mhm.
updated, their
That
occurred
little clip? Yeah.
broadcast. So
Yep.
you can register for all the modules on your system for the error and the status updated, and none of your modules know that there's a logger.
Yeah, yeah, no, that is a clean way to do it too. That
So it,
for
it
the
means,
air,
and
yeah,
both are valid, and you can go into a whole discussion of which way to go. And there would also be a valid reason to say, well, but it's okay for the module that launched the module
yeah,
to
yeah.
be the only one that registers for those status and then decide if it lets it populate forward up, like the tree thing. But this is an example where a beginner, I don't want them to
No,
be
yeah,
struggling with
you
that.
need to like talk. Yeah, I feel like you need to ask them a few questions to determine like what's most important to them, and then just you pick one for them based on what they tell you. You say, okay, it sounds like this is gonna meet your need the way you're thinking about the problem, and
Yeah.
let's just use that one because they don't have the skill to evaluate those different
But
options.
when you start with the tree and you start kind of enforcing and putting too much focus on the tree, then people start to get panic about everything having to go on the tree.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
that's why my focus is more, let's use plain English or Spanish or whatever
yeah,
language
yeah. No, I
we're
like
teaching the
that. Yeah, because
class.
they understand the English once.
If what you're telling me makes sense, right? And it's just asking them, just tell me in a sentence what you're doing. And it's one of the things that I tried to do with the blog post that I did for the that acquisition module, the one that that has a different, and I tell them there's a mistake there, because we end up having the DAC module depends on the login module,
Yeah, there was
and
something like that.
that feels wrong, right?
Yeah,
And it feels wrong because it doesn't make sense that an independent DAC module has to know how to log things. And it makes more sense for the DAC module to say data updated, and the calling module, whoever is the main coordinator, saying, okay, the data was updated. I do have the timestamp. I have all the information. Now I'll tell the logger to log it.
yeah,
And this means I can take the DAC module by itself to another application and reuse it without needing to drag and impose whatever logger I was already using. But you can get to that tree thing
yeah,
just by using plain English and
yeah.
then saying, let's talk about this. Do you plan to use this DAC module somewhere else? Do you think that it's okay for the DAC module to be imposing how things are going to be logged? What
Yeah.
if you need a database, right? So I feel like explaining the tree is important after the fact, right? Like let's get things figured out in English, and then we can start going into, you don't want circular dependencies. You want to try to enforce the tree structure as much as possible, but these things should be coming
Yeah.
after everybody understands that requests go in one direction and broadcasts go in the other
Yep.
direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you say a couple of points there that said that were very important. And one, I think it's important to understand that when you send a message or you receive it, it implies some sort of link, and just making that like, if I'm going to send a message to Fabiola, I have to know Fabiola exists. I have to know what messages I can send her. So therefore, that is the dependency that I have to know it exists.
And not only that I have
Broadcast,
to
it's just
know,
shouting it
she
out
ha-
there. Yeah.
she has to come with me everywhere I go.
Yes, that is
Right?
the approach.
And this was another interesting one that we got from the DQMH day. I had never had this feedback before. And I'm still kind of like processing to figure out how to describe it so nobody else gets this confusion. But we had someone that say, hey, my confusion was like, who was implementing the solution, right? And and to me has always been very obvious that the module is responsible for implementing the request. Like it receives the request and it's going to implement the request in this message handling loop. And this person had the confusion where he was thinking I send the request, but then I am the one implemented the solution. So it was more like a confusion between broadcast and request.
Ah.
So yeah, so I sent him the documentation that comes on DQMH, like the very first one that describes at a very high level, and then it kind of made more sense. But yeah, I mean, this is why I'm remember I said this at the GDevCon and at GDevCon that I'm looking for guinea pigs, and I don't think we want to include I'm looking at the date. So we are at the end of September, and it's in October that I'm going to make the decision of who's going to be. So I don't know if we want to include this link, but we can. Let's see. There's always room. Like my mom used to say, if somebody else wants to come for dinner, we can just add more water to the soup, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things that I want to do is improve the DQMH training and create a self-paced DQMH training. And I'm realizing that I need to work with people that are at different levels of proficiency so I can get these different confusions and point of learning on what would be the best approach. Like one of the things that I'm changing lately is instead, like the last time I taught DQMH, I started with defining what our end users are. Because we have different levels of interest, right? You have the guy that, like my husband, he keeps saying that he's not my target audience, but he is. He's an electrical engineer. He's at the bench top. He has an instrument that he's developing, and he just needs a quick and dirty way of communicating with it. So in this household, we say we want a fast and clean instead of quick and dirty. And the fast and clean is creating a DQMH module with an API tester. So he's that level of user where he knows enough to create a DQMH. His API tester does what he needs. And then once he's ready for it to be used in an application, then he gives it to me and then I have to clean it up, right? Because he still does a lot of things like, for example, the API tester may need you to know how the registers of the communication are. And I'm like, no, honey, like I need to know, a start, a stop, but I don't need to know exactly the register. So I start pushing things down. But there's even a higher level than that. And it's the person that is going to be doing a train of the eyes and is going to be using your API, right?
Yeah, and send message after another, expecting them to execute serially. Yeah.
And he may not even need to register for events, right? Yep. So that's a type of user that we had a lot in mind when we started DQMH. Like the shipping example of DQMH has that user in mind. Like you have all the train of VIs. But we kind of stopped talking to that user long ago. And all our training and everything forgets about that's a use case too. So the last time I gave training, there was a group of people that knew enough LabVIEW to be dangerous, but they were not going to be creating their own DQMH modules. They were going to be using the module that somebody else created. So that kind of guided me to start the training that way. So now that's one thing I want to approach. What if we start the training with, there's this DQMH module that you inherited from someone, how do you use it? And then let's design your first DQMH module and then look at an application that has different DQMH modules. I think that may help with getting the whole request and broadcast confusion figured out. Well, we'll see. That's part of what I want to try out with this guinea pig training thing that I'm going to do.
I actually like that approach to teaching people, though, because I think teaching object-oriented programming, I think, is another great example where that approach works really well, because you can hand somebody an object, you say, you don't have to care what's going on inside.
Yeah.
Just pass this around, it carries some data with it. And if you fork, you can explain that if you fork it, you get a copy or whatever, but you can just say, chain these VIs together.
Or even, but the example I had is I used to have a customer that was totally afraid of object-oriented, right? And that was one of his requirements. I want no object-oriented program. But then he asked me, he wanted something that was even easier than the simple serial, the write and read serial example that ships with LabVIEW. And I was like, you want something even simpler than that. So, so I started asking questions and everything. And then I realized what it was. So I went and I was like, I'm not going to tell him. So I created, basically a factory. Well, not a factory. It was the creating BI would decide which class you would instantiate, simulated or real.
Yep.
Right? And then depending on what you did, if you were not providing the configuration in the cluster, it would prompt you. So you would fill it out. And then you could start the read and write. And he was like, this is exactly what I wanted. It's like 3 BIs, 4 BIs. That's it. I love it. This is perfect. By the way, what is this weird wire?
Oh, I was gonna say, I thought you like disguised it so the wire looks like the Visa wire.
So
And
I thought
I
about
would do that. I would go that far.
I thought about that, but that would have been too deceiving. But there was no box showed anyway, right? It was just this
Yeah.
thing,
Yep.
and he only had a Boolean that he changed whether it was simulated or not. So he's like, but what is this squiggly wire? And I'm like, well, about that, sorry, you said you didn't want objects, but what you were asking me, like the best way to do it without too many case structures and everything was that. And he's like, oh, that's an object. Oh, that's fine. Use as many as you want, right?
Yeah.
But it was like being afraid of it because he had inherited code for someone else that the object-oriented made it very difficult for him to use. But in this case, it was encapsulated inside the API, like he didn't need to worry about it.
Well, I think the other problem is too, like if you start immediately teaching people inheritance and composition, it goes way over their head. Like I think they do need to start with that simple and just like I like it's a cluster basically that you just.
Well, I tell them that when I teach it, I say it's a cluster with superpowers.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
And it's a cluster that it comes hidden in a box, right? That's why it's a little box, and you have to have certain permits in order to access that box.
Okay, so here's a connecting thread. You talked earlier about the language that we use, and I've heard somebody say, and I think it was Steve, that good code tells a story.
Mm-hmm.
I think that relates back to the language and stuff, but also kind of connects coding and art. And you are very into art. And are you just into pottery, or are you into other types of art as well?
Well, I've been during the pandemic, I started taking drawing lessons, but it's geometric patterns drawing lessons. So, and as anything else I do. By the way, every time I tell this to someone, they're like, really? You didn't know this? So I was diagnosed with ADHD at age 47, so recently, and everybody's like, Fab, that should have been obvious to you for years ago, but it was like it had never been officially diagnosed. But when I find something that I really get interested, like I deep dive, right? So during the pandemic, I discovered this geometric pattern design, and I have now a collection of compasses, vintage compasses, because it's really hard to find really nice drafting tools. So anyway, so that got me into that rabbit hole. And then that rabbit hole led to, well, now I need to color them. So I started getting into watercolors. And that led to something. So yeah, so I've been doing a little bit of painting with watercolors and the geometry pattern design and drawing, and then translating that to pottery. Because pottery is the thing that I've been doing ceramics since 2001.
Oh, wow.
About 23 years. Yeah.
Now, the ceramics thing, are you mostly self-taught? Did you take classes somewhere? How did
So
you
I started at a community studio here in Austin. Back then it used to be called Clayways. Now it's called Austin Pottery. And that helped me a lot, like just kind of like get the sense of how to center clay. Well, first I did hand building, which is no potter's wheel. And then I did the potter's wheel and I fell in love with it. So I got all the basics from that. Then what happened is you start getting to a place where you start asking questions, and when you're in a community studio, they obviously there's competing interests, right? Like community studio has to still make money, and like they're going to be telling you things that you're not supposed to do in very generic terms. So an example would be don't make your walls too thick because the piece is going to explode, right? Or make sure you pop all the bubbles because air makes the pieces explode. No, what makes a piece explode inside the kiln is if there's trapped moisture, as you are bringing the kiln up in temperature, the water that is trapped in the clay starts to boil, and that creates a steam, and that steam needs to come out somewhere. So if you do that temperature rise too quickly, there's more chance of that. So when you have your own studio, you basically do a kindling. You put your kiln to be below boiling temperature for 10 hours, whatever you want, to make sure that your pieces are really dry. And then you can go as fast as you can or you want.
Okay.
But a community studio has the competing thing that they have to fire things as fast as possible. So it's a lot easier to say, don't do thick walls and make sure all there's no hollow forms that are closed. So once I started getting into that, I started having more and more questions. And the community studio didn't help anymore. So I started taking more reading books and taking online classes. I learned how to make my own clay. I learned how to make my own glazes. I learned more about the fit between the clay and the glaze. And I got very technical with it. And now the latest thing is we have been playing with, we made, and this is, I'm saying we because I dragged Luis into this. We built a downdraft, first a downdraft bucket kiln, like a small bucket, metal bucket that you use for ashes that you can buy at Home Depot.
Yeah.
With a chimney coming out of it, and it downdraft, it brings all the heat coming down and goes into the chimney, and then the smoke comes out the other end. And then that worked out really good. So then we did 30-gallon downdraft metal trash can kiln. So anyway, I can speak hours, just like I can speak for hours about DQMH, I can speak for hours about ceramics. But to your question about art, so right now, and I guess the video, the presentation I did at GDevCon will come out at some point to explain what has happened in the last 3 years. But the project that I have in mind is I want to build a larger studio. Because right now my studio is in a car garage. I want to build a larger studio in the backyard with 2 apartments so artists can come and do residencies. And that's kind of like the thing that I can tell people, like that's my elevator pitch. And that explains it pretty succinctly what I want to do. But my goal really is I want to find a way to have engineers and artists collaborate. And I feel like if we could get a group of engineers and a group of artists solving problems, we could take the advantage of the artists that they're not limited by the laws of physics, right? They're going to be a lot more open to throwing crazy ideas. And then the engineers, I think that a lot of us got into engineering because we like problem solving, but we also like to play. And when you spend a lot of time in engineering, sometimes you forget that. You forget the playing, and you forget the problem solving, and you go, Luis used to say this, like, if you ship Rev A, you're not innovating, right? We get to what's safe. And we go with whatever cookie cutter problem solving for our area of expertise is, and we're no longer trying wild things. So I feel like if we could get that combination, like cool stuff would come out of it. I feel like, there's a lot of focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And what I like to say is that a STEM without STEAM, without the A, without the art, runs out of power, runs out of steam. Steam is used to power machinery. And I feel now I need all the letters. I need science, technology, engineering, art, and math to be happy. Like, to have a sense of purpose, I need to have all those. And ceramics gives you all of them. So I think that's why I'm so attracted to pottery.
That's cool. Yeah, no, I think everybody should have some sort of like art type thing that they do for fun, just like something to unwind and think outside the box a little bit and just like experiment and try new things. I think that's a useful thing to have.
And somebody at GDevCon gave me the idea that it may just be that I do workshops, like teach DQMH or team building or whatever, and then have those engineers in the afternoon. Okay, guys, we're going to take you out of your comfort zone and we're going to make some tile decoration or right? And that may be just enough, like just give the engineers the opportunity to do something that's more artistic. I was going to say more creative, but this is another thing is I believe that at least software is a very creative thing.
Very much.
And mechanical engineering can also be very creative aspect, right? There's civil engineering, same thing is I feel like we tend to say, oh, creativity is for artists, but there's a lot of creativity going on engineering.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I think that would be a nice thing. So if anybody has any ideas on how to get engineers and artists to collaborate, I'm all ears. Right now, I'm more in the sense of like, if you build it, they will come. So first, I need to find a good architect and get those designs and ideas going, and then build the place. But once it's built, my first approach is going to be to focus on having artists to come, and then maybe see what engineering problems they have. But yeah, we'll see. Right now I'm in the phase of just throw a bunch of the spaghetti to the wall and then see what sticks.
Yeah, well, I've often thought too, I'm really into rock climbing, and I've often thought there are people who do like rock climbing retreats and stuff. It'd be cool to like go write some code in the morning and go rock climb in the afternoon or something. Because I think taking people out of their element and giving them that time to think and reflect while they're doing something else. I think Nancy's whole thing where she made us get up and do the frog dance thing, she's talking about ideating or whatever. I think that kind of fits with that. Like, go do something else, take your mind off the problem. And when you're not thinking about it, then all of a sudden that brilliant idea like pops in your head.
And this is something that it's so hard to explain to younger developers. The stepping away, like if I could go talk to my younger self, like I used to pull all-nighters, right, and try to like code till the night, and sometimes it was needed. Like I worked on projects with Jeffrey Travis where we had to do demos for marketing trade shows, and when you're doing that, your list of requirements is to wow the end user, which is a very hard requirement. It's not a requirement, right? It's like there's no way to track if you're meeting the requirement or not. And the other thing is you have a date when the thing needs to be shipped because it has to make it to the convention center by X date. So there's a limit on when you're delivering, and there's this crazy, insane requirement that you have to meet. So with those projects, I had to pull all-nighters, but it was more like I had to, right? Because there was no way to meet the deadline.
Yeah.
But apart from those projects, when it was projects where the deadline is more made up, right? Like where they tell you, oh, we need these by September. And then when you start asking them, well, but when are you going to get X, Y, and Z? And you start seeing that they just gave you a date just to give you a date.
Yeah.
That's the different thing. Anyway, when I was coding, when I was younger, I would pull the all-nighters, or I would put a lot of hours. And we finally got to this arrangement with Luis that because I was working from home, it was also very easy to just keep working.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that we started doing is we said, okay, we work from 9 to 5. If we had a day that we had, long lunch or whatever, then we would extract that to 6 or 7 or whatever. But there was a closing time. And half an hour earlier, like he would send me a message, okay, we're going to go for a walk at such and such time. And the deal was that last half an hour, I had to write down what I was trying to do, where was I stuck if I was stuck, and what were my next ideas to try. The typical, I'm 5 minutes from fixing this problem.
Yeah.
Never 5 minutes.
Going, and you keep resetting the timer. Yeah.
No, and whenever Luis would come in and he would say, and I would say it's 5 minutes, and he's like, 5 minutes clock time or programmer's time? Because you already knew that the programmer's time could be anything.
Yeah.
So I would write that down, and then we would go for a walk. And sometimes during that walk, I may talk to Luis about what I was trying to do. And I already had like the script because I just had written it, right? And sometimes just in our walk, just by talking, without him saying anything, sometimes he did, but sometimes he just didn't say anything. And I would be like, oh, I know where the problem is.
Yep.
Now, here's the crazy and the really hard part was coming back
And
and
not
not
immediately.
going into the office.
Yes.
Right? Like coming back, either recording it in the phone or writing it, or coming back and writing it on a napkin to leave it there for breakfast time and not be tempted to go into the office. So then the next morning I would wake up most of the time with additional stuff because your brain keeps working on it.
Yeah.
And then I would take my napkin, go into the office and match it with what I had written the day before. And I realized that I became a lot more efficient, right? If I had stayed working on it, I would be working for hours. But because I made myself take that time, it was also easier to come back and say, I'm going to do the unit test first, right? Because now I know what the
The
end
end goal is,
result is. So it just kind of like guided me into better practices because it was not everything about, oh, I'm just so close, right? I just need, no,
oh
it's
yeah,
like,
that's addictive, and yeah, that's a bad path to go down.
no. I said on my presentation that I tend to be a firefighter, but I also realize that if you do those all-nighters, you're the arsonist too.
Yeah.
Like you're creating fires left and right, and you're tired, and
Yep.
sometimes you make rush decisions. Yeah, so just stepping away. So yeah, I don't know if I wouldn't join a rock climbing thing because I am I am very clumsy, but it would be like I'd even just saying let's go for a hike.
Yep.
Like there's gonna be the workshop is gonna be intensive 4 hours, but then we go for a lunch and then we're gonna go for a hike and we may discuss these things and then go back the next day. Now, the problem with those things is our society is so much in the go, 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 that it will be very hard to get, a company probably to let their employees go to something like that. Like they wouldn't like an agenda that says afternoon, team building activity. Who knows? Maybe we can get a psychologist or someone to explain why that is actually beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I do find I spend a lot of time trying to sell my ideas to big corporations that just kind of I don't know if they're stuck in the past or just don't get it, or I don't know. They
Well,
just differently.
sometimes we're not talking to the right people, right?
Well, that too.
Um, it's always who signs the checks, who determines the budget, who determines the goals,
Yeah.
right? One of the things that I learned from Brian Powell is asking what the people that I'm going to be working with are going to be measured on.
Yes, that is very much it.
Because if they're going to be measuring in, I don't know, how many bodies they have hitting sitting on tables, like that's not going to be any use. But if they're measured on productivity or they need to do more with the amount of people they have, like that's what gets you to build a quote that makes more sense for those people. For the thing that I talk in the book, in the second to last chapter, we talk about working in teams, and there's the Delacor thermometer, and this is something that we used to do for audits, and audits are they take like years to sell, right? And normally you have to go to really higher ups for them to understand because it's a lot of time, so they are a lot of money. But at the end, you come up with a nice picture of where your teams are at, and then what are the areas that they need to work on, and what are the areas that they are going to work on. Because that's the other thing, right? You cannot go from a team that does nothing, like doesn't have source code control and doesn't have
Yeah.
requirements and everything, to have a team that does it all, right?
Yeah, no, they're not. Yeah.
So you have to figure out, you basically are helping them. This is why we call it a thermometer, because it tells you where your patient is sick, right?
Yep.
And then what are the areas that you're going to focus on. And the example, the case study that we used for the book was one that it was the first time, one of the pillars that we interview on is like how happy they are, like the personal, the human aspect, like what do they like about the job, what they don't like, all that. And this was the first time that I was working with a team with those numbers were really high. Like the people were telling me, I don't care if I have to commute 2 hours to work because I know that I'm working for, a really nice thing. And I was like, damn, because before that, I knew that anything I could do, I would leave them better.
Yep.
But when you are working with a team that just loves, like, doesn't care about all the hassles that they're having to
Yeah.
live through to get to work, wow, like how can I make sure that I make it better for them? Right? I mean, we ended up making it better for them, but that was an interesting
But you also ask yourself, like, what problem are you solving at that point too, right? Like, yeah.
well, no, but they did. I mean, the problem they had, and so the reason, and this is a problem with me, I start going in tangents. The reason I was bringing this up is because it took us about a year to sell that they needed to do this, and the guy that I was working with finally got me to a VP or someone like executive room level, really, really one of the higher ups. And what sold it was that they were having trouble finding two more LabVIEW developers,
Okay.
and they needed to do more with the few people they had.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
So the way we ended up selling it to him was, this is how much it's going to cost you to pay the salary of two people. This is how much it's going to cost you to do the audit, right? And of course, it was less. And by the way, by the end of the audit and by the end of working 3 to 6 months with your teams, we're going to get you where you don't need to hire those two people.
So I have
So we're going to save you money in the end. Like, it's going to be expensive right now, but we're going to save you 2 headcounts. And the guy was like sold, right? So it was finding what was important to that person, going higher up enough. Also, and it also helped because by the moment when we needed, one of the things we do when we do the audits is would go talk to the other departments that they work with. And if you're being paid by the department, it's going to be a lot harder to get them to give you your time. But when you say VP of so and so sent me, they give you time. So yeah, so that
So
goes through.
I have a question about that. Do you sell differently then to different people? Like, for example, like you're selling that guy, like, oh, we're not going to you don't have to hire two new people, but the people who you're working with, the engineers, you're selling to them as, hey, I'm going to make your life better because we're going to be more efficient, we're going to get more done, you're going to it's going to be more fun, whatever.
So, and I mean, I guess in that case, things got aligned, right? Like, the team was overworked, and
Okay.
they needed those two people,
Ah,
right? So me telling them, I can guarantee you, I can get you to work more efficient where you don't need those two people. They really couldn't. They didn't believe me, right? But it was one of the things that was obvious even before starting the audit was they were silos. They had people working in manufacturing, people working with R&D, and people working like, right, and they didn't talk to each other. And the problem is, like, when you work like that, yes, you need two more people, but if we get you all to be the LabVIEW team, right? Because all
yeah.
of these guys were 100% LabVIEW.
Mhm.
It's not like other situations where you have a domain expert that happens to use LabVIEW. No, these people were LabVIEW developers that were working for their departments. And I'm like, what if we bring you all together? You use all the same tools. So whatever the R&D folks are using can then be used in manufacturing, can then be used in like everywhere that in the company. And
Yeah,
then
so you gain a bunch of efficiency from not reinventing the wheel all the time.
exactly. And by the way, you all are going to be programming in similar ways. So when somebody goes on vacation,
You can
even
grab
if
stuff.
you are mainly on manufacturing, you're going to be able to go help the guy in R&D, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Ah,
So that's how you make up for the other two people. Yeah.
exactly. It was, and then that was, and granted, it's one of those where you're basically telling them, I need to do the audit so I can confirm to you that what I'm telling you is real.
Mhm.
But we knew that that's how we were going to get the extra people, because the inefficiency was clear. You had silos of
Yeah.
knowledge. You had people that were very proud of their area of expertise,
Yeah.
and they were not sharing with
And
everybody.
it wasn't even the individuals being inefficient, it was the
No,
system. So it's
it
not like
was
I'm
the
going to make
system.
this person more efficient, which you could probably do. You could teach them some new tips and tricks, but it was just the way of working was inefficient.
Yeah. And that's why it needed to be sold such a high level in the company.
Yeah. Well, also, I'm thinking like you've got people from different departments. If you're going to pull them all together, that crosses a lot of fiefdoms and silos. And
Yeah.
Also,
And you get a lot of people that are like, oh, you're messing, like this is my, if you have a lot
yeah,
of kingdom builders,
yeah.
um, yeah.
Interesting. So I was reading this book, and I kind of like to get your opinion on this. The book is something that James McNally recommended. It's called, what is it called? The Problem with Software: Why Smart Engineers Write Bad Code. I don't know if you've read this book or not.
No, that one I haven't. I didn't even hear about it. I was like, oh, I'm sure he's gonna tell me one that I already read. No, I haven't
It's a
read
good book. I like it. It talks about like the history of computing and bugs and why we have bugs and stuff. But one of the points that it made, it was talking about agile versus command and control kind of ways of working.
that.
And I thought this was somewhat insightful. He basically said agilists are like overly optimistic. It's like put the right people in the room, give them some skills, get out of their way, and good things happen. If we run into problems, we'll solve them. Versus the pessimistic, the command and control way is very pessimistic, in that like if we turn people loose, they're going to create lots of problems. So therefore, we must anticipate every possible problem ahead of time and put guardrails in and all this stuff. And I don't
Mhm.
know if you, I don't know. I just thought that was insightful. So I don't know if you want to
So
comment.
here's then and the presentation at GDevCon. You were you there? I know you were at the GDevCon, but were you at my presentation in
I
GDevCon?
did go to, yeah, I missed a bunch of the presentations, but I did sit in on yours.
So when I prepared the presentation, I was expecting an hour and it ended up being 30 minutes. So I kind of like sped up through the first part, and there were a lot of things that I could cover. So I didn't get to cover this, or maybe I did, but not in depth. Um, it was very different to be a consultant than to work for a company the last 3 years, right? And I thought when we got acquired, I thought, well, they're paying all this money for me. I'm still gonna have the authority, right? I'm
Hmm.
still gonna have they're paying all this money, they're gonna listen to me. And that did not happen. So my authority was like super small, both in the sense of where I was in the org chart, like because they put us at the bottom of the org chart, and also nobody cared about what my credentials were. When I came as a consultant, it was like, you listen to Fab, right? She has these years of experience, she has these case studies, she has we know she can, and you listen to her. Like in this case with the VP saying, you're gonna go to do the interview she wants to do, and
Yeah.
you're gonna do whatever she says, right? When I went to work for this company, I had to do things by influence. And it was so slow because it was really hard to convince people of doing the right thing. And I realized that once I was given the authority, like for example, there was one guy that he was a good LabVIEW programmer, was a very decent LabVIEW developer, and he had used DQMH, but it was like he was very slowly getting into changing to that. Well, then at midway through my life in that company, they have him reporting to me, and he immediately moved to DQMH, right? And it was like, it was just the fact that, well, now he's reporting to me. He knew that I was going to ask for him to work on DQMH, and he moved to work into DQMH. So I can see what you're saying about the agile aspect versus the command. Um, as a consultant, my answer would have been no, agile is always better. That's the way to go and everything. As someone that was an employee that was trying to yell at the world and tell them that there's a better way to do things, and not having anyone listening to me, I would say no, you do need to have some authority, somebody that comes and says, no, you're gonna do it this way.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it depends a lot on where you're at. Also, the company we were working for was not. It was the first time that Luis and I were not working for an engineering company. It was, it was a consumer products for a company, type of company where they're not, the main people were not engineers. Where like before, for example, NI is the complete opposite, right? When we started at NI, even the HR VP was an engineer. Like all the founders and all the people that started were engineers. Everyone in marketing were engineers. So it's also very different type of organization.
Mhm.
So all that to say is, I don't think IO per se, or the command
Yeah.
structure is the answer. Is what is the culture of the company,
And
and depending on the culture of the company, one of those two is going to work more naturally.
mhm.
Now the thing there, and this is something I feel like Agile has been bastardized a little bit, right?
Yeah. No, it definitely.
But if you go to like the Agile manifesto, let's reduce it. If you go to the Agile website, there's the Agile manifesto, and then there's another page that is
12 points.
principles.
Yeah.
And the principles has a lot more details. And it's when you get into those principles that you realize really what Agile is you find a smaller team of people that are working together and you ask them to self-organize. And that's very different than saying we're going to take a company of 3,000 people and we're going to have them self-organize.
No, yeah.
That's not going to work, right? But if you say, okay, the team of 4 or 5 people, they're going to self-organize, that kind of makes more sense. And then they can figure out what works for them. They also need to figure out when they're going to hire someone, if that someone is going to fit in this self-organized way, or if they're going to have to adjust when the new person comes in, which is totally fine. Because that's also another thing of Agile is like these things are going to be changing because the type of problems that you're solving are going to be changing and your team is going to be changing. So yeah, I don't think there's a magic answer. It's going to be depending a lot of from your culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a couple of points. One is you mentioned like bringing on new team members, and I remember listening to this talk, and they were talking about teams and team agreements and stuff, and basically about how like every time you add or remove a person, the team dynamic changes, and you should revisit all of those things every time. Like you think like you can just add another person, but it completely changes the entire.
No, so here's one of the things that happened at Delacor is like when Luis and I started hiring people, right? Like, and we did contractors, we didn't do employees. We realized early on that just bringing a single contractor would change our culture. Like it had the power. We're so small that having one new person could change the culture completely. Like I tell the story that in my story as a consultant, I only had one time a customer curse at me. And it was because I had hired a contractor and that contractor messed up and the customer, who was someone that I probably should not have been working with anyway, just started cursing at me. And I was like, what? And there were what the F's everywhere, flying in every direction, right? And I just, in that case, I just basically took the position of, I don't need this. I'm not gonna this. But it was the going back and analyzing what happened here, right? So what we started doing is instead of doing interviews, okay, and the other case was a contractor that he wrote the most beautiful code you've seen in your life, documented everything. It was like I had never seen such beautiful code since then. And he was amazing, but that was the interview, right? Was asking him about how would you solve problems, seeing his code and everything. And then we started working together. He was the most unreliable person I've ever worked with. Like, you know, he would tell you, I'll have these by Thursday. And then Thursday would come by, Friday, Saturday. And then the next Monday, and he wouldn't, you know, answer calls or anything. And then on next Monday, he would show up. And he's like I said earlier, I will return it in by Thursday. And that's when I started to realize, no, you need to give me like the exact Thursday of which week, right? And at what time. It was not just a Thursday. So after those experiences, we're like, okay, you know, a big company, like when we were at N9, Luis and I both worked at N9. So when we were at N9 can afford to hire, you know, 10 people and absorb them into a huge company. And if they don't work out, the culture slowly will expel them out, right? But they're not going to change the culture. But if you're 2 people and you hire a contractor, that contractor, even though he's not full-time, has enough influence to change the culture of the company. And that's when we started with the 40 hours trial period. So what we did is if any contractor wanted to work with us, we would put them in tests for 40 hours and we would pay them a very low rate per hour. And the idea of those 40 hours was like, let's see how we work together. And this is a two-way interview, right? It's like you also get to really see behind the scenes if you really want to work with me. I know I'm difficult to work with. So, right,
I
let's
think we
see.
all are. I think we all just don't admit that.
Yeah, no, I totally know. I like my things. I have strong opinions. Everybody knows that. Um, and the nice thing about that 40 hours that happened was the first project you would get in your 40 hours was going through all our training, and it was making it better for the next person. So you had to, create Jira issues if link was broken, or if you found a better video, like you had to create issues, you had to solve them, you had to document them. So the next person would have a better experience because you went through that.
Yeah.
And it was a really easy way of saying anyone can BS you for an hour in an interview. But then the getting to work together for a couple of weeks, that was the other thing I would ask them. No thing about I'm going to make the 40 hours in 1 week. It was like 10 hours each week. So we have a period of a month to see really how life works, right? And that proved to be a much better way to hiring people because we really, and it would be either me or them saying, no, this is not going to work out, right?
Yeah.
And that was it. It was because we realized it's not just if they have the right skills for the job, are they a good fit for our culture?
Yeah, I would rather have somebody who's a good fit but doesn't have the skills because I could teach them.
Well, and this goes to that book. I think I recommended it to you. I don't know if you've read it, The Joy Inc.
I did read that book. Yes, that's a great book.
And it talks about when you're hiring people, hire for the kindergarten skills because those you cannot test. You cannot teach someone. Anything else you can teach them, right? But like working teams, like be just a nice person. Like those things you cannot teach, but you can teach them how to use Git, right? So then that's important.
Yeah, I remember having that conversation a few times. So going back a little bit though, you talked about being at the bottom of the org chart and like screaming like there has to be a better way. I'm sure you've heard the consultants joke where like all the consultant really does is come in and interview the people at the bottom and then just take all their complaints to the top and like
Yeah. But
because it's somebody outside somehow, then it's magically the boss now listens.
I working at this company, I got to see a lot of those things that we strongly believed because we were on the outside.
Yeah.
I got to see consultants come in and not ask the people at the bottom,
Ah,
right? And they would like run these long meetings with 30 people invited to the meeting, and I would be like, dude, you would be more efficient if you choose like a sample size of these people and you interview them 15 minutes each, and you would get a lot more information than what you're getting. And I think what it was, this company was it was no longer a startup, but it was a company that grew really, really fast, right? The reason we got acquired during the pandemic is because they went like, so they needed a lot of people. And I feel like they were using that principle that we were talking about earlier. If you hire great talent and you leave them alone, just good things are going to happen.
yeah.
But if you're hiring that amount of new talent,
They're not all, yeah, you can't possibly filter them all.
yeah, there's everybody's trying to do it, it's like talking about the basketball A team, right? Remember that basketball team from the US a couple of years ago, well, not couple of Olympics ago,
Okay.
that went to the Olympics and they didn't win the gold medal. And it was because it was a bunch of A
Individual.
stars that didn't know how to play in a team, right? So it's the same thing. It's like it's not enough to hire the right talent. It's also there needs to be some guidance on this is what we want to achieve. So I think part of the problem was that there was a lot of new people that were hired. There were a lot of consultants that were brought in, a lot at the same time, trying to solve similar problems at the same time without talking to the same people. So you would get, 4 different suggestions for the higher ups on how things needed to work. And the other thing was hiring people that came with an experience that was not similar to what the company needed. What I'm talking about is if you are a company that's going from a startup to being more established, you're not going to have the SAP system. You're not going to have like the database figure out. You're not going to have inventory stuff because you come from being a startup. A lot of your systems and tools are going to be very ad hoc, right? You might be still using Excel spreadsheet to tracking issues. I don't know.
Yeah.
So if you go and hire people that have experience in the industry, but they were working for companies that are 50 years old, 60 years old, 40 years old, 30 years old, right? They're going to come from environments that already have all those systems in place. And they already have a person, right, that decides what that system needs to be. So what happened is they would hire all this talent and they would be like, oh, where is your inventory management system? Oh, you don't have one. Okay, let me go hire the consultants to create an inventory system that will match the inventory system that I used in the previous place I worked at.
Even though maybe it's a different.
Yeah, when what you really needed to do is hire people that come from companies that are 10 years old, like a little bit like, okay, if your company is 5 years old, like hire people that come from companies that are 10 years old, right? Hire the people that brought those systems and created those systems in those other companies.
Yeah.
Like they have the experience on getting you to the next step. If you hire people that the experience they have is coming from companies that they have already everything set up for them, even if they are talented people, they're not going to be able to
function. Yeah, they're gonna want those things in place. And so here's an interesting thing that I've noticed, and I think there's a divide in the LabVIEW community between people who do end of line testing and then R&D type testing, because I definitely noticed this. Like end of line testing, like the requirements are very different, robustness and all this stuff, and having very good documented processes and all this stuff. And in R&D, like if you're doing brand new stuff, there's not a process.
Well, yeah, I'll give you an example. The whole discussion about Python, right? So this company I joined, and everybody's like, "Oh, you need to be using Python." And if you're in R&D, Python was okay. You could tell the engineers just run these scripts. I'm like, I'm not going to be doing an end of line test with Python scripts.
Script, yeah,
right? Like I cannot have an operator be entering
all this script and pass these parameters, and they're not
like no. So I was like,
to click on and a button to click, and
exactly. So I was like, if you want me to use Python, I'll do, but show me that you can create an executable, an installer, that you can do a user interface that is it is intuitive and it's gonna. And of course they couldn't. Now, I'm sure there are Python programmers out there.
I'm sure there's probably a way to do it, but
yeah. But at least the people I was working with, they would give me scripts.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's not gonna work, right? So and that was also something I told one of my bosses when they told me, well, why are you using Python? And I'm like, look, I have no problem. I'm using a Python script if it makes sense, and then I'll use the Python node from LabVIEW.
Yeah.
But for what we're doing, which is mainly talking to hardware to test things at the end of line test, like LabVIEW is just perfect for it. Right?
Yeah.
Even if we buy instruments that are not made by NI, I can still figure out how to create an API for it really quickly. And I proved it. Like more than once, I was able to create the whole application in less than a week. And that was also one of the things that the guy that started reporting for me, that like I said, it took a while to get him to actually start building. But once he started using DQMH, he was like, and using all the reusable packages that we had already created. And we had like this BIPM repository that had a lot of packages that we created from Delacor that we brought in when they acquired us. And he was like, I can put together an application really quickly just because I already have the building pieces I need. So all of a sudden, things that used to take weeks, now I can do in a couple of days, right? And then you still need to do some tweaking. And that's when finally people stopped asking me about doing things in Python, because it was like, no, you cannot use this. Now, DQMH helps a lot with, like we were saying earlier, about having the people that do LabVIEW programs for R&D and the people that do LabVIEW programs for end of line. Like let's look at those two streams. If you get the people in R&D to use DQMH for their quick and dirty, for just getting the couple of data that they want to get from that device that they're building, if you get them to use DQMH, and I'm using DQMH because that's what I like, right? But basically, if you get them to work on whatever framework the whole company has agreed on, by the time you get to end of line test, it doesn't become this thing where the end of line tester developers have not been working with the R&D, and you get to the end and everybody's like, you need to have the end of line tester. No, now it's like, oh, we have been working together all this time. So to get to the end of line tester, we already have the API. We've already been working together. It's really quick to
Porting
start.
the code and adding a
Yeah.
little bit, yeah.
And maybe you're going to be using less functions than what they were using at R&D. But it was also nice to show that one of the things that I managed to convince them of is that we didn't need to have a LabVIEW team for manufacturing test and a LabVIEW team for R&D. We just needed to be all together, and that helped with creating all the parts we needed, right, for the last items for testing.
Very good. Okay, so it's about time to start slowly wrapping things up.
Like I said, we went in all directions, and we didn't talk about the DQMH enthusiast, which was the thing that we said.
That was what I was going to bring up. Yeah, I wanted if you want to say a few words about that, because I honestly don't know a whole lot about it other than you made an announcement. At least.
Yeah. So your company SAS Workshops is a DQMH trusted advisor, and as a trusted advisor, you like to be mentioned on our website, right? Because that gives you leads, and the DQMH Consortium can also point out, hey, if you need a workshop, just call SAS Workshops. We also have this whole thing about, we tell them we have seen your code, we have analyzed your code, we vouch for you, right? Well, there were several companies and individuals that approached us that said, hey, I want in, but my company will kill me if our company is mentioned in your website, right? And I don't need leads because I'm not a consultant. But I do want access to your tools at a discount, and I want early access to your new releases of DQMH, and I want to help the DQMH Consortium to keep maintaining these tools that we're using, right, and that we get for free. So we talked about it. This came at the GDevCon NA, and it was funny because it was like 3 or 4 different people that came and asked similar things at the same time. So Jorg and I went back and talked to them, and we're like, okay, what if there was something just like the trusted advisors without your name on the website? You would still have access to our solid discussion channel where we all discuss things. And you would have the discount to the products, and you would get a code review if you wanted. And they were like, yeah, that's exactly what we need. So we said, okay, we're going to call it the DQMH Enthusiasts program. And it's going to cost the same as the DQMH Trusted Advisors. And they have access to discount on projects, on our products, and they have access to the private community that we have created. And I think there's going to be other added benefits. Like, I'm sure if they need a quick someone help, I need a DQMH module that does A, B, and C. You know how we have the bench for the trusted advisors, where right now, if a trusted advisor needs developers, he can go to the bench. Or if a trusted advisor has, I have so many developers sitting idle right now. If you need extra help, let me know. I think we can have a similar channel to, I need somebody to do a DQMH module for me. And then the trusted advisors could just jump into that. And then the enthusiasts would have that direct access to it. So that's the DQMH enthusiast, and you can find more information at dqmh.org about it. And the idea is to have these subscriptions that are going to help us continue to maintain DQMH, which I want to reiterate. I have not been in this world for the last 3 years. I only met with the DQMH Consortium once a week for an hour. The only thing that I really got my hands dirty on was on DQMH7, getting the whole architecture for the private events. But other than that, everything that has happened in DQMH world has been the DQMH Consortium board, which I am really thankful for. And I think it's important to emphasize that DQMH has grown enough that it's not just me.
I will put in a plug. It's been a while since I've done a DQMH project, and teaching the class, we use the latest version with the new tools. And they are very good. I quite like them.
Well, yeah, I think
And
that
watching your old videos and watching you do stuff the hard way, and I'm just sitting there laughing, and they're like, "Why is she doing that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, because the tools didn't exist back then, and now
yes,
it's."
yes. Well, and this is also why I wanted to do that DQMH training, improve the DQMH training, right? Because we're talking about a new.
Yeah,
Yeah, we need to
those
just do
videos are
the
slightly dated, but the good thing is the main point is still there.
yeah.
It's like it's taking you several clicks to get there, but it's the same principle, same idea. So I do have one question I like to ask people, and that is if you can tell me about an experiment that you tried that didn't turn out how you thought it would and what you learned. Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. I did not prep you for that, but hopefully if you've listened to this, you might be somewhat prepped.
So it didn't turn out, and does it have to be LabVIEW related, or it can
No,
be any?
not at all. Just an experiment and something you learned.
So okay, so on this whole crazy thing about the firing, and so normally you fire in a kiln gets to 2200 Fahrenheit, like really, really hot. But these alternative firing, it's done on a trash can, like I said earlier, and you get to 800 Celsius, so about 1200 Fahrenheit. So it's a little bit higher than what your oven gets to. So it's a lot of fun. And the way you do it is you paint the thing, you put ferric chloride, wrap it in aluminum foil. That's called a sagger. So what you're doing is creating like a mini kiln that goes into the kiln. Saggers were used in ancient times to protect your piece from all the stuff that's around, so it doesn't get ashes and wood and stuff. But we use the saggers now to encourage things to get into your piece. It's just you're trying to, I notice that I said encourage and not control, because there's no controlling. You can encourage, but you cannot control. So you can do things like put like feathers and stuff. Okay, so we did the experiment was we were gonna fire for the first time, and I had an event where 50 people were gonna be working on tiles. So I didn't want that to be the first time I was doing this, right? I had done it at a small scale. So we went to Santa Fe with my friend and we built the kiln, and then we had several test pieces. So what happened was not all of them turned out not as nice. Like some of them were not working really well. And we were using something that it was on the Instagram, which was using metallic Sharpies as a resist. So the first thing we realized is that some of the pieces, the pens would not last, right? You had to use 2 pens. And on the other pieces, it worked really well. So we realized after the whole thing was done that a smooth surface would work better with the pens, and also was a lot nicer to polish after the piece was done. So that meant I had to go back to Austin, and all the pieces that I had already bisque fired for this event, for the 50 people event, I had to spray them with terra sigillata and rebisque them. So terra sigillata is what, if you go to a museum and you see something from Egypt, that it's like low fire, but it still has like a sheen to it, but it has no glaze. You know what I'm talking about? And it's very smooth. That is achieved with using the lightest particles of clay. And then you can brush that, and you come with a plastic, because I'm sure the ancient Romans used plastic, and you can get the shine out of the piece, but it makes a very smooth piece. So we did that. The 50 people event happened, and everything worked out really nice.
Really cool.
So
always do a dry run.
Yeah, that was you have to do a dry run, especially even if you have done it before, right? Like I said, we had done these before with the buckets. But the thing is, when you're in a bucket, your pieces are smaller.
Ah, okay.
So you're really not getting to see that difference. Is when you start using bigger pieces that these things may, start to pop up. But
So then other lesson might be that not everything scales the way you think it would.
No, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that was actually something I also learned when we finally did the final firing, because we ended up putting like about 50 tiles in the 30-gallon trash can, and I ended up not having enough heat flow. So normally the test, the dry run and everything, we got everything to get to temperature in an hour, where this time we got to get to 3 hours. So it took a lot longer, but the added benefit was all the pieces that were in the middle came out great.
Oh, perfect.
Because the pieces at the top, the tiles at the top and the tiles at the bottom work as an insulator.
Ah, okay.
So it was like creating another kiln inside the kiln that made it where the temperature was maintained the same for all those pieces.
Good. That's a good stopping point. So thank you very much. It's good, great conversation. It's nice to catch up with you.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And like I said, I didn't know where this was gonna go, but you got me talking, and who knows where we end up.
Yeah, I figured there would be plenty to talk about. So, all right. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabviewexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @TheLVExperiment.